From Washington, Mr. Heck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir, for being here. So for over a year now, I've been helping to lead a task force trying to understand why home prices and rents, well, frankly, are soaring all over the country. And it turns out the answer is pretty simple. We're not building enough housing units, period. I looked this morning, and as it turns out, new home starts are lower than when you started at Treasury under the first President Bush. And a lot of time has passed and the population has grown considerably. Fewer home starts than way back then. So prices are rising because of the simple fact that we're missing millions of homes and we have too many people bidding for too few homes. And we're trying to understand why construction isn't happening and what can be done about it. We feel pretty strongly about this because home ownership is still an integral part of the American dream, and frankly, it's the #1 source of retirement security for most Americans. But it also strikes me that it's pretty important to your work, sir. Now, in my mind, I have kind of a simple model. When the economy goes bad, you all cut rates, and that means that more people buy more automobiles and more homes, and the workers in those industries work longer hours and get more wages, and it creates a virtuous cycle of economic growth. But what happens if home construction doesn't or can't respond? The weakness in housing in this last recovery was clearly a reason why it was at historic, some would say anemic, levels. And if home construction continues to be broken, and there's every bit of evidence that it is, I'm wondering what that means for the next recession and what your response can and should be. Does it mean you have to cut interest rates even more aggressively to get the economic response? Because it didn't seem to work out very well that way this time.
So you're right. It's those back in the day, it was nothing to see. Well, it was common to see 2 million housing starts in a year and more, and we don't see that now. And part of that is just the population's growing a lot less, a lot more slowly now, much slower than it was. So there's less demand. And I'm sure you talk to a lot of home builders and their representatives in your work, and what they say now is there's really supply side constraints. They can't find electricians, plumbers, carpenters, and also it's hard to get zoning. It's hard to get lots. Very difficult to do that. They're also they're yelling loudly about materials prices, lumber in particular, and so what they're doing is they're building fewer homes, and the prices are going up more quickly. We don't really have the tools to deal with that. In terms of the importance of housing, though, the economy is so much bigger than it was before, and housing is smaller than it was before. So it's a less important driver of economic activity at the aggregate level. It's still tremendously important for individuals. I mean, it is still part of the American dream and part of what young families and folks want to have. So, but I don't think it has. It doesn't have. It's not the single most important factor driving monetary policy right now. I think these issues are really issues of, issues out in the labor market that we don't directly affect.
So, would you agree, however, that historically, housing construction has been played a much more important role in economic recovery?
It was a far bigger part of the economy, and can be very cyclical. So yes, if you go back to the 70s and 80s, it was, sort of first in, first out, first into recession, first out.
And before, during recoveries, and if you do the math on what the increase in GDP growth would be, if we simply had a housing market that was in balance, then it wouldn't be too hard to calculate a material increase in GDP growth. Would you agree with that?
It would be bigger. I mean, if the housing market, if housing starts were 50% higher or something, yeah, that would be meaningful for sure.
So some of what you said, not only do I agree with, but our study concludes as well, which is that these other inputs, land, labor, lending, lumber, or materials, are the key drivers here. But the takeaway I have from you today is that those inputs and whatever limitations and challenges that they are presenting that is holding back housing construction may in fact be immune to interest rate reduction, and so we better get to work on those factors.
Well said.
Thank you, sir.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois,